Well, for the second time today, we're back with a Championship managerial special, and this time we're heading to the east where Norwich City have appointed Liam Manning from Bristol City as their new head coach on a 4-year deal running till 2029. The 39-year-old led Bristol City to the playoffs where they were dismantled by Sheffield United this year, but got the Robins into the top 6, and now presumably, we'll be looking to do the same at Norwich City. As always with these manager specials, we're going to have a look at the old man, what's happened the last couple of years at the club, and moving forward, what we think Liam Manning can do, what he'll need to achieve, and whether or not he can do it at Norwich City. So if you are a fan of the Canaries, get your thoughts in the comments below how you think it's going to go. As before we move on to talk about Liam Manning and his time coming up at the club, let's move back to the old man and the previous couple of years, where last season we largely had Johannes Thorup and then a brief interim period with Jack Wilshere, and the season before that David Wagner, because look, I've risked getting in a little bit of trouble with the Norwich fan base because I've been a little bit vocal over the last couple of years. There was a lot of excitement last summer when Johannes Thorup came in at around the same time, just over a year ago to the day, because of this progressive style of football and a young manager who was going to come in and revolutionise things after David Wagner, who was seen to be the boring, defensive, giving up possession type manager, which I always found a little bit ironic because David Wagner, if we go back to 2 seasons ago, took Norwich City into the playoffs with, defensively at least, a relatively poor team, having lost 2 of his star players at the start of the season. He then adapted his team tactically, went against all of his previous managerial record and his sort of reputation at other clubs where he was an attacking manager. You look at the Huddersfield tide he took up here with 60% possession, loads of goals, loads of chances. And he went to a slightly more pragmatic style at Norwich. Now, having said that, they still scored 79 goals last year, more than they scored this year, and conceded less. However, he was deemed to be a bit of a boring manager and a little bit defensive, and they had that awful away record, which you can't defend, but still got into the top 6. Then there was excitement about Johannes Thorup coming in. I remember this last summer saying I'm a little bit sceptical, and there was a lot of positivity, which is great. But the results weren't really forthcoming this season, bar a brilliant first half of the season for Borja Sainz and a little bit of a spell from Josh Sargent. Goals were slightly harder to come by, albeit Norwich was still one of the better scorers in the Championship, and defensively they were far worse, conceding 68 goals, and we're getting opened up a lot more. Some of the defeats at home towards the end were frightening, and they lost that solidity, that brilliant home record that they'd had the previous season. In the end, Johannes Thorup, after David Wagner had over a 40% win rate, only picked up 29.79%. Over 47 games in charge, only won 14 of them. And with the Norwich side that was stacked with attacking quality, it ended up being a very disappointing year. And in my opinion, a slight underachievement with the players that were there. Then we obviously have the interim spell with Jack Wilshere at the end of the season, who quite clearly joined the club looking at a pathway to become the head coach eventually. Then told he's not going to be in the running, which is fair enough. Norwich have to go and get the right man. And he's now left the club as well, meaning there's a lot of turnover off the pitch. There's a little bit on it as well. The likes of Angus Gunn announced to be moving on from the retained list. A couple of loan players obviously going back too. And a lot of interest in Josh Sargent and, of course, Borja Sainz, who both have relatively good seasons. Josh Sargent struggling to stay fit at times, but both a massive goal threat when they are fully fit and firing. So that's the backdrop of where Norwich City are. And the reason I've talked about that in a bit more detail and maybe gone back a bit further to David Wagner is because I see some similarities, which we're going to talk about soon. Because Norwich City are delighted to announce the appointment of Liam Manning as head coach following their extensive recruitment process. Still only 39, he joins from Bristol City, where he of course led them to the playoffs last season. Has also been brilliant at MK Dons, where he got them into the EFL playoffs in League One, and has got experience elsewhere with the likes of Lommel, was at New York City as academy director, so he's got a wide breadth of footballing knowledge and coaching experience across the footballing world. It's very clear the sporting director Ben Napper was delighted to have him here, which of course is what they said about Thorup last year, but every club does that. We can't hold that against them. A 4-year contract given, and he's got the ambitions, and this is the one bit that interests me. His approach aligns with our footballing ideas and strategy. Now, this is something that I want to touch on based on the last 2 seasons. We're going to talk about 2 sides of this Liam Manning appointment, the footballing side and the personal side. And we'll start with that quickly because Liam Manning, personally, clearly has had a very tough year. Moving to a club that's far closer to home, because there are a few I've seen criticised, particularly Bristol City fans, talking about it being perhaps a sideways step. And while Norwich have been in the Premier League almost as a yo-yo club previously for a few years, and have got more experience at that top level, you could argue, based on recent championship seasons, based on the team and the squad that both have at the minute, that it's close to a sideways step, or only a slight up or down, depending on where you go from it. However, there is no doubt that given what's happened in Manning's life in the last year, obviously the football world came together when he lost his newborn son last October, took some compassionate leave from Bristol City, came back and managed to do an exceptional job in the circumstances, and has to be applauded massively for his achievements professionally and personally last year. But moving back to the club where it all started from a youth point of view, moving back to an area closer to home, definitely makes sense. There's no doubt in that. So from a personal point of view, I can see it making sense for everyone. For Norwich City to go and say, we've got a manager that's just overachieved and got someone into the playoffs last season, probably surprisingly, I think is also a very ideal situation because, again, it generates excitement around the appointment. But then we come to the football side where things become a little bit more interesting because Liam Manning's win rate at Bristol City wasn't exceptional. It was just under 35%. However, it was excellent at Oxford at MK Dons where he did very good jobs and played a very entertaining style of football. His MK Dons and his Oxford sides both averaged a goal and a half a game at the very least. Both had significant positive goal differences and both had slightly better defensive records, only conceding one a game. However, at Bristol City, we saw something different. And this is the reason I went back to the David Wagner stint, because David Wagner had a very attacking record, had a very aggressive CV in terms of his style of play, in terms of his results, his goal scoring record at teams. And then at Norwich, he was criticised for being a bit too pragmatic at times, particularly away from home. Now, Liam Manning has gone through and tread a very similar path when going to Bristol City because he's kind of gone against all of his instincts. Bristol City, particularly away from home, amongst the lowest for possession had in the league last season. In a number of games that they were able to get victories, I think of Middlesbrough away as an example, just after he came back from that spell away, had less than a third, and in some cases even less than a quarter of the possession in a match. However, they still picked up results and managed to overachieve. But if you go and look at his 85 games in charge of Bristol City, they only just averaged over a goal a game and actually had a negative goal difference. So while Liam Manning has shown that he can be a progressive ball-playing, attacking manager, is he going to be able to go and do that at Norwich City, where a good coach will go in and look at the best way to get results? David Wagner went against his instincts and got the team into the top six. Johannes Thorup stuck with his and took the team to mid-table. And my argument looking at the Norwich City squad is that the defence isn't strong enough and as a squad isn't deep enough to be able to manage with the high pressing, high intensity, high line style of football that so many clubs like to play these days. Now, of course, Norwich City have appointed Manning as a head coach. If they give him the right signings and give him a say in them, they could end up with a squad that suits them down to the ground. But if not, his task is then to get the best out of the squad he's got. And my worry is that based on what happened 2 years ago, that might cause frustration because Bristol City surprised me more than anyone last year because they went against Manning's instincts and played in a very different way. And it got great results, but it wasn't entertaining to watch a lot of the time. If you compare the two teams, for example, Norwich City, yes, finished 7 places and 11 points further down the table, but they also scored 12 more goals. They also conceded 13 more. There were far more goals. Carrow Road was the place for entertainment. Bristol City very much trying to shut up shop on a lot of the occasions, particularly away from home. And despite their poor end to the season, finished with, by their standards, a very good defensive record. Now, I can completely understand why Liam Manning wants to make the move because, of course, we mentioned closer to home, but from a footballing side of things, you would expect him to get more backing at Norwich City after a tough couple of years, potentially with one or both of those stars in Sargent and Sainz moving on. There's going to be a bit of money to spend. There's going to be a chance to regenerate the squad, and they're going to have to, particularly from a defensive base, to try and make the squad more solid. Of course, with Angus Gunn going, a goalkeeper's going to be there as well. And you could argue, obviously we'll talk in more detail about Bristol City when they appoint their new manager, but that was one of the arguments in January, is that they didn't bolster the squad and they didn't have that depth to then go and compete with a Sheffield United in the playoffs, So Liam Manning may well feel, yes, on the paper and at the moment, it looks like a sideways move in a championship. However, is the back in here, is the director of football model and the vision for the long term going to give him a chance to succeed and maybe go back to playing the style of football that he wanted to, in which case he's happy, the Norwich fans are happy, and the club starts to push forward again. I do worry about goals if they lose the other two players because there were a lot of games, particularly where Sainz had his suspension, where Sargent had his long injury, where the other one wasn't firing, where there were little barren streaks where Norwich weren't able to score goals. But overall, I think of all the championship teams, I mean, we mentioned it earlier, didn't we, when we were talking about West Brom not being the most frequent scorers, but Norwich City were the second highest scorers in the championship this year, still found themselves in the bottom half, which is where that balance to defensive play needs to come in. But this is why I find this appointment so intriguing and so interesting, because Liam Manning has shown he can do both sides of the game. At Bristol City, he adapted to the team that he had and ground out results. At Oxford and at MK Dons, where he had a bit of a free rein, a bit less pressure, and maybe a bit less expectation, he produced really free-flowing, entertaining sides to watch. And I'm not talking about what we've seen probably with his predecessor at MK Dons in Russell Martin. My criticism is at times it's a bit slow, it's a bit methodical, it's possession for possession's sake. Actually, MK Dons went under Liam Manning and Oxford at times as well. Far more dynamic, far more quick to get it forward, but doing so in a stylish and an entertaining manner, which if you've got great ball playing midfielders, which Norwich City are going to have, then fantastic. It could work an absolute treat. I do still feel what happens in the summer with the defensive side of the team and whether they hold on to one or both of those attacking stars is going to have a large impact on Manning's success next year. Because much like the West Brom manager special we did earlier today, which you can find up in the eye above, the expectation is surely going to be to get back into that top six. You would assume that's why Thorup was sacked. I mean, David Wagner got there and then got sacked. So if he does it and it's not entertaining, will he get sacked as well? It's going to be interesting to see. However, I do think the positives are they've gone for a head coach who's far more experienced than the one we talked about earlier, who's got a background of managing sides in the EFL, coaching good young English players, improving players, which is something that is crucial when you're at any club bar one of the top in the world, because that sell-on fee becomes so important in the future. And is he someone who can take the players that are already at the club forward? Norwich City have got a proud youth academy history. They've often promoted players into the first team. Is he going to be able to do that in the long term? Because they've certainly given him one hell of a contract and they're clearly right behind him in terms of his ambitions, his original playing style. And based on the fact they talked about his strategy so much in the statement, I do think they're going to try and build a team that will allow him to express his side in a way that he did at MK Dons and Oxford rather than at Bristol City. But that will take time. And the two questions we ask at the end are, will he get that time? Will the manager see out his contract? And how will Norwich City do next season? Well, as we always say in these manager specials, the average lifespan of a championship manager is just under a year. And actually, to not be sacked and to leave after nearly 2 years is pretty good going for Liam Manning. I do think he's someone who's got a chance of outlasting the usual time, but to be 4 seasons at a club in this modern day and age in the EFL is virtually impossible. So it's hard to say that that's going to happen. But I do think he'll be given the season by the club. But will he be able to take the club back towards the top 6? I know this is a bit of a cop-out answer, and I do normally say, yes, I think they've got a great chance to compete, or no. But I genuinely don't know in this instance. I do think that if they end up, say, losing Sainz and Sargent and not being able to get in the players they want, that they may still be able to compete for the outskirts of the playoffs by being a bit more of a gritty Bristol City style team from last season. But I don't think that's what the fans or the club or the manager coming in will want, or the head coach, sorry. So I think we are going to see some investment. I feel it's crucial that there's pace added to the back line, that there's quality added into the back line as well, and just depth in the squad so they're not relying on the same 4 or 5, and then behind it there's very little impact. I do think they're going to lose one of the attacking players at least. There's a lot of interest from big clubs in Sargent at the minute, and therefore there will have to be some investment on that front as well. It's a bit of a lottery. We talk about the lack of goal scorers in a championship. We're going to do a special in a few weeks' time talking about that. The complete lack of goals in last year's campaign compared to the year before. Norwich City actually one of the best performers despite themselves scoring less than the previous season. The championship has less goals than ever, and finding a goal scorer is a very hard thing to do. So if Norwich City will lose one or both, it will make it more difficult for Liam Manning. I'm going to say I think they can compete for a place in the top six, but whether or not they will make it, I think is based on signings. If they can get the right players in, with this coach, with someone who's proven to be able to improve players, and with likely a couple of members of his backroom team to follow in, I think Norwich City could be one of those to sneak into the top six next year. But it is going to depend largely on recruitment. And as a head coach, Liam Manning will not be solely responsible for that. As it is, though, it doesn't really matter what I think. Norwich City fans, what do you make of the Liam Manning appointment as head coach? What do you make of the 4-year deal? Are you excited? Do you think he's going to be given the backing to produce one of those entertaining sides? Or is he going to have to grind it out for the first year, as he did last season with Bristol City in his push for the playoffs? Let us know what you think down in the comments. Other Championship fans, do you think this appointment's going to make a difference to Norwich? Are you worried about them? How do you think it compares to the West Brom one we talked about earlier? Give us your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, please do chuck a quick thumbs up on it. Subscribe and turn that notification bell on because there are more Championship Manager specials to come. Looks like Hull City might be next. That one could be a bit more challenging. Don't forget, we'll also be returning next season with our Championship predictions every single match week. We'll be predicting all the scores and doing our play-along league again. So come and join us for that. The pre-season predictions are just, 7 or 8 weeks away now. We'll see you here for them and for more manager specials as the Championship Manager merry-go-round is well and truly in full swing.